What it is, what it do, YouTube. The name of this video vlog is the Ronald Reagan Deception. All through the media, especially over the course of about the last 10 years, there has been a campaign to rewrite history, the way I look at it. And in that rewriting of history, one thing that's happening is that there's a very angelic and patriotic face being put on the 41st President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. I don't even know where to begin with Ronald Reagan. The only thing I'll say is, man, to hell with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was not one of the best presidents in U.S. history, as the current modern-day media is trying to make him out to be. And these modern-day Republicans, they don't have anything to do with Ronald Reagan's policy. Ronald Reagan taxed the rich at like 90%. You know, he taxed them at 90% of their income. Today, the modern-day Republican Party, they trying to make it to where the rich don't pay taxes, period. You know, I think, Mitt Romney running for president, he only paid like 13 or 14% last year. But anyways, let me get into quite a few reasons as to why, you shouldn't listen to the media tell you anything positive about Ronald Reagan. Let me see where I start. Ronald Reagan was elected into office because Jimmy Carter was looked at as a weak president. And it wasn't that he was weak as much so as he was a very diplomatic president, But Ronald Reagan was an old war hawk, and he was also a B-list actor. So Ronald Reagan was good. He played in a lot of B-list movies. He was good at getting up and standing in front of people and putting on a show or a deception. That's part of the reason why the Republican Party reached out and got him. He was a very good actor. They thought Arnold Schwarzenegger would do the same thing, but Schwarzenegger couldn't get up there and do, he couldn't communicate with America the way that Ronald Reagan could. One of the first things that you'll hear them say is that Ronald Reagan dealt with the hostage crisis in Iran a lot better than Jimmy Carter did, which is bullshit. The situation to get the hostages out of Iran really just stinks to high heaven, because the Iranians ain't no more intelligent than the North Koreans. And the North Koreans rarely run a successful rocket test. The rockets that Iran has today are from the United States of America. Ronald Reagan basically gave them those rockets in exchange for the hostages. Not to mention the money he got from Central America, but I'll get into that in a minute. But basically, he paid the Iranians to let those hostages go because it was vitally important his first year in office that he absolutely positively looked like a war hawk president who was having success. So he gave the Iranians the missiles they have now. If Iran didn't have the missiles that they have now that they got from us, Iran wouldn't have too much of a modern day missile arsenal. They would be over there just like the North Koreans, shooting missiles up that maybe make it a half a mile off the ground before it just starts to do like a firecracker and come back down, The Iranians, I doubt if they would have good missile technology had not it been for the missiles that Ronald Reagan gave them. That's what the whole Iran-Contra scandal was about. And I can't see how they consider this man one of the greatest presidents ever when his entire second term as president was basically dealing with what I'm talking about right now, the Iran missile crisis. When we make Ronald Reagan the standard of good president, the only thing I can say is that, boy, how much of a moral low can we really fall down to? Number two, the prison industrial complex. Ronald Reagan began spending the federal money to build thousands of prisons all around the country. And there's a reason why he wanted to build all them prisons, because Ronald Reagan hated black people, period. And he was one of the many presidents who was on the extermination plan when it came to black people. He wanted to build as many presidents to promote homosexuality by way of the prison industrial complex, aka lock up as many black men as possible, keep them in jail as long as possible so they'll have sex with one another, begin spreading AIDS, which popped up, I mind you, around the time that Ronald Reagan came into office. But the prison industrial complex, we can't call anybody a great president who incarcerates over 1 million of his own citizens. We got like 5% of the world's population in America and 20% of the prisoners. Ronald Reagan was the architect or the father of the prison industrial complex for black people. Number three, the Sandinista cocaine scandal. You know, just like you have over there in Mexico right now, you had all type of cocaine wars during the 60s, 70s, and they hit their height during the 80s. Ronald Reagan ordered the FBI and the U.S. military to go down to Nicaragua and help out a cocaine cartel by the name of the Sandinistas, beat all their enemies, seize all their land, and ship cheap cocaine into the United States. And the reason why they needed this cheap cocaine was to begin the crack epidemic that plagued the black community from the 80s all the way up to maybe the early 2000s. Most crackheads nowadays are actually white folk, but crack was connected to the Sandinistas. So here you have the media referring to Ronald Reagan as one of the best presidents ever, and this man, I mean, they acting a fool over this so-called Fast and Furious thing with Eric Holder. The Sandinista thing didn't even come close. Better yet, what's going on with Eric Holder does not even come close to what the U.S. military, under the orders of Ronald Reagan, did with the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. This is a bunch of folks who killed thousands of people, displaced tens of thousands of people for the purpose of growing cocaine on their land and bringing it here into America. The crack cocaine epidemic of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s was began by Ronald Reagan and financed by the U.S. taxpayers through the U.S. military. And then the crack cocaine that they bought here had a two-headed demon. Not only did it poison and kill many a niggas, but it also assisted in some of the most racist laws that were ever written, the old cocaine laws, where if you got caught with powder cocaine, most likely to be caught with, white people most likely to be caught with powder cocaine, you got hardly nothing. But if you got caught with crack, which nothing but black people in the 80s and 90s dealt with, then you was pretty much going to go to jail for at least 5 years for just an itty-bitty little piece of crack. Lord forbid you had a bunch of it. You'd be in jail forever. So whenever the media goes on its deception tirade, trying to tell you that Ronald Reagan was a good president, one of the greatest ever, they showing a complete disregard for black people, and they ain't doing nothing but attempting to wrap his policies up in some perfect cloak. Ronald Reagan spent his entire second administration, the whole second administration, his entire last 4 years was the Iran missile crisis. And it's not like he went over to Iran and beat his chest and threatened the Ayatollahs and says, give us our hostages, before we kicked y'all's asses. He went over there like a snickering little punk and gave them a bunch of missiles in exchange for those hostages just so he could look good. Anyways, the media is full of it, and the media is corporate controlled nowadays. They gonna say what they want, but they not gonna tell you too much of the truth when it comes to hardly anything in history. Nowadays, they gonna put a corporate twist on it and tell you what they want to tell you. And I'm telling you here today that Ronald Reagan was not a good president. It's your boy Vince Rashad Hop.